There are nights when the world becomes so quiet that even a single breath can feel loud. This is a fictional story created to bring reflection, healing, and quiet inspiration through moments that feel real because they are human. That night, the rain fell harder than usual. Not the kind that scares people, but the kind that makes them walk faster. Look down and forget everything that isn't urgent. No one noticed the young man standing under the dim light. No one asked why his eyes looked so tired, or why his hands never seemed to rest. And no one noticed the girl until she collapsed, right in front of him. For a moment, he didn't move, because sometimes the hardest thing in life is not saving someone else. It's deciding whether you deserve to try again. The rain had been falling for hours. Not violently, not angrily, just steadily. Like a quiet conversation, the sky refused to end. Streetlights flickered along the narrow road, their pale glow stretching across wet pavement, the kind of street most people passed without remembering. A corner between somewhere important and somewhere forgotten. Xavier Cole stood beneath a small awning outside a closed convenience store. He wasn't trying to stay completely dry, just dry enough. His jacket was old, but clean, the kind of thing a man wears when he doesn't want attention. His posture was relaxed, but not careless. There was a stillness about him, like someone who had learned how to disappear without leaving. Cars passed occasionally, headlights sliding across his face for just a second, then gone. No one stopped. No one looked twice. And that was exactly how he preferred it. Xavier shifted his weight slightly, glancing down at his hands. They were steady. Always steady. It used to mean something. Now, it meant nothing at all. A faint breeze pushed the rain sideways, tapping softly against the metal awning above him. The rhythm was almost hypnotic. For most people, it would have been comforting. For Xavier, it was just familiar. Too familiar. Somewhere far behind his eyes, memories lingered. Not loud, not intrusive, just present, like shadows that refused to fade no matter how many lights you turned on. He exhaled slowly. Then he heard it. Footsteps, uneven, dragging slightly, not the confident rhythm of someone walking with purpose, but the uncertain, broken pattern of someone barely holding on. Xavier didn't look up immediately. He didn't need to. There are things you learn to recognize, even without seeing them. Pain is one of them. The footsteps came closer, then closer. And then a figure stumbled into the dim light. A girl, young, soaked completely through. Her hair clung to her face, her clothes heavy with rain. But it wasn't the water that caught Xavier's attention. It was her eyes, wide, unfocused, searching for something that wasn't there. Her breathing was wrong, too shallow, too fast. Her body swayed once, twice, and then she collapsed. The sound was soft, almost swallowed by the rain. But to Xavier, it echoed. For a moment, everything went still. The rain, the street, even the distant hum of passing cars seemed to fade. There was only the girl, lying on the cold pavement, and Xavier. He didn't move, not because he didn't care, but because he knew exactly what this meant. His gaze locked onto her, scanning quickly, automatically. Breathing irregular, skin pale under the dim light, muscle response delayed. His mind began working before he gave it permission. It had always done that, diagnosing, connecting, predicting. He knew this pattern. He had seen it before. Too many times. A dangerous drop in blood pressure. Possible internal imbalance. Time. Very limited. Xavier's fingers twitched slightly, then stilled again. No, not anymore. He had made that decision a long time ago, a quiet promise to himself, one he had kept every single day since. Don't get involved. Don't go back. Don't pretend you can fix everything, because sometimes you can't. And when you can't, the cost stays with you forever. The rain grew heavier, tapping against the pavement around the girl's still body. Her chest rose unevenly, each breath weaker than the last. Xavier looked away, just for a second, toward the empty street. No one else was there. No witnesses. No expectations. No one who would ever know what he chose to do next, or what he chose not to do. His jaw tightened. This wasn't his responsibility. It couldn't be. Not anymore. He took a step back. Just one. As if distance alone could make the moment disappear. But it didn't, because something else appeared instead. A memory. Not of a hospital, not of machines or bright lights, but of a small hand, holding on to his, trusting him, believing that he would never fail. Xavier's breath caught. He closed his eyes for a brief second, and when he opened them again, he wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. He was looking at someone's daughter, someone who still had time, if someone chose to act. The rain fell harder now, unrelenting, unforgiving. And still Xavier Cole stood there, between who he used to be and who he had tried so hard to become. For a few long seconds, he didn't move, but something inside him already had. The rain did not stop. It never does, on nights like this. It just keeps falling, as if the world is trying to wash something away, but never quite succeeds. Xavier still stood there. The girl lay only a few feet in front of him, her body trembling faintly, now her breath thinner, weaker, slipping further away with each passing second. He could hear it. Not just the sound, but the pattern. Irregular, fading, dangerously close to silence. His fingers curled slowly at his sides. He knew this. Every part of him knew this. And that was the problem. Because once you recognize something like this, you don't get to pretend anymore. A distant sound of thunder rolled across the sky. Low, heavy, like something breaking open. And just like that, the past came back. It wasn't rain. Not that night. It had been bright. Too bright. Hospital lights stretching across white walls, reflecting off polished floors that smelled faintly of antiseptic, and something deeper, something harder to name. Pressure, urgency, fear. Vitals are dropping. The voice had been sharp, controlled, but Xavier heard what wasn't being said. We're losing her. He stood at the foot of the bed. Younger, sharper, his coat clean, his eyes focused, his hands steady beyond question. Back then, his hands meant everything. They said you were the best. Someone had whispered that earlier. Not as praise, as expectation. Xavier didn't answer. He never did. Because being the best didn't mean you felt ready. It just meant no one else was left to try. The patient was young, too young. Her chest rose unevenly beneath the thin hospital blanket. Machines beeped around her fast, insistent, like a ticking clock that refused to slow down. Dr. Cole, a nurse's voice, waiting, trusting. Xavier stepped forward. Everything inside him aligned. Training, instinct, memory. This was where he belonged. This was where he made sense. Prepare for intervention. His voice had been calm, not loud, but absolute. Hands moved quickly around him. Tools passed. Monitors adjusted. And Xavier stepped into that narrow space between life and something else. Time bent in those moments. Seconds stretched. Decisions sharpened. There was no room for doubt. Only action. He worked with precision. Every movement exact. Every choice calculated. He had done this before. Many times. And every time he had won. Until that night, back in the present, a drop of rain slid down Xavier's cheek. Cold, but it felt warmer than the memory. The girl on the pavement shifted slightly. A faint, broken breath escaped her lips. Too weak. Too late. If nothing changed. Xavier's gaze locked onto her again. And for a brief second his mind split in two. One part of him stayed here. On the street. In the rain. The other went back. She's not responding. The monitor's tone had changed. Lower now. Unstable. Xavier adjusted his position, his focus narrowing. No. We're not losing this. He didn't say it out loud. He said it to himself. Because sometimes, that's all you have. One more attempt. One more correction. One more chance. His hands moved faster. More precise. Every second mattered now. Every breath counted. But something was wrong. Not in his technique. Not in his decisions. Something deeper. Something he couldn't control. The human body has limits. And sometimes it decides for you. Doctor? The nurse's voice again. Softer this time. Careful. Like she already knew. Xavier didn't look up. He refused. Not yet. Not now. He pushed harder. Adjusted again. Tried again. Because stopping meant accepting. And he wasn't ready for that. Not for her. Not for himself. But the monitor didn't care. The sound flattened. A long, unbroken tone. Cold. Final. The rain hit harder. Back on the empty street, Xavier inhaled sharply, as if his body remembered before his mind did. The sound? That sound. It had never left him. Not really. The girl's hand twitched slightly on the pavement, barely noticeable. But he saw it. Of course he did. He always saw the small things. That had been his gift. And his curse. Time of death. Someone had said it. He didn't remember who, or when. Only that the words felt distant, like they were meant for someone else. Because Xavier Cole, the best, the one who never walked away, had failed. He stood there, staring at the still body, waiting for something to change, for the monitor to flicker, for the breath to return, for reality to correct itself. But it didn't. It never does. And in that moment, something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a thread pulled too tight. Finally giving way. Back in the rain, Xavier exhaled slowly. The present returned, but the weight stayed. It always did. That was the problem with memories like this. They don't end. They just wait. The girl's breathing hitched again. Weaker. Fading. Time was almost gone now. Xavier knew exactly what would happen next. He could see it. Step by step. The way her body would shut down. The way the silence would come. The way he would stand there again. Too late. Too still. Too broken to act. His hand trembled slightly. Just once. Barely visible. But to him it was everything. Because his hands were never supposed to tremble. Not like this. Not ever. He clenched them tighter, trying to force the memory back down, trying to hold on to the promise he had made. No more. No more hospitals. No more responsibility. No more moments where everything rests. In your hands. Because when you fail, it doesn't leave you. It follows you. Into quiet streets. Into rainy nights. into moments just like this. Xavier took another step back. His breathing slowed, controlled, measured. He had learned how to do that, how to step away, how to survive, without going back. And for a second it almost worked. The distance, the detachment, the illusion that this wasn't his fight anymore. But then the girl made a sound. Soft, fragile, barely there, but human. And that was enough, because no matter how far you run from who you used to be, there are moments that find you anyway, moments that don't ask for permission, moments that don't care about your past. They just exist, waiting for someone to choose. Xavier's eyes closed briefly, and in that darkness he didn't see the hospital. He didn't see the monitor. He didn't see failure. He saw something else. A small face, smiling, trusting him, believing that he would try, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when he wasn't sure he could win. Xavier opened his eyes. The rain blurred everything for a second. Or maybe it wasn't just the rain. His gaze dropped to the girl again. Still there, still fighting, in the only way she could. And for the first time that night, the question changed. It was no longer, what if I fail? It became, what if I don't try? The silence around him deepened, heavy, expectant, and somewhere inside, very quietly, something began to shift, not the past. That would never change. But the way it held him, the way it defined him, the way it kept him standing still, when someone needed him to move. Xavier's fingers loosened, then slowly, very slowly, began to rise. The rain kept falling, not louder, not softer, just constant, like the world had decided to hold its breath and wait. Xavier's hand hovered in the air, not yet reaching her, not yet pulling away, just suspended between two lives, the one he had lived before and the one he had been hiding in ever since. The girl lay motionless on the pavement. Her breathing had changed again, not just shallow, now unstable, irregular in a way that no longer asked for time, but demanded it. Immediately. Xavier saw it. Of course he did. His mind had already finished the diagnosis, long before his body agreed to move. Airway compromised, circulation failing, temperature dropping fast. The rain wasn't helping. Every second she stayed there. Her chances slipped further away. He knew this pattern. He knew where it led. And more importantly, he knew exactly how to stop it. Or at least, try. His fingers curled slightly, then opened again. A quiet war, playing out in the smallest movements, because doing nothing was easier, safer. If he didn't try, he wouldn't fail. If he didn't step forward, he wouldn't have to carry another memory, another face, another moment that would follow him into every quiet night after. That had been the rule, the one he lived by. Stay out of it, stay unseen, stay safe. And yet there she was, not a theory, not a memory, not a past mistake, a life, right in front of him, fading. Xavier inhaled slowly. The air was cold, sharp, real, unlike the past, unlike the echoes that never quite left him. This was happening now. And the truth, the one he had tried so hard to bury, was simple. He still knew how to help. He always had. The rain hit harder against the pavement, drops splashing around her still body. Each one, a quiet reminder. Time doesn't wait. Not for fear. Not for regret. Not for anyone. Xavier's jaw tightened. Then he moved. He dropped to his knees beside her. The impact against the wet ground barely registered. His focus had already shifted. Completely. No hesitation now. No distance. Just action. His hands steady again. Not because the fear was gone, but because something else had taken its place. Purpose. Stay with me. The words came out softer than he expected. Not a command, not a professional tone. Just human. He gently turned her onto her back, careful to support her neck. Her skin was cold. Too cold. Rainwater mixed with something else. Something subtle but wrong. Xavier's eyes sharpened. He leaned closer, listening, watching, counting. Breaths uneven, pulse weak. His mind moved fast, faster than thought. This wasn't something he needed to remember. This was something his body already knew. Okay. He adjusted her position slightly, tilting her head just enough to open her airway. A small movement. Precise. Essential. He watched her chest. Waited. A breath came thin, strained. But there. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Xavier's hand hovered near her face. For just a fraction of a second, the past tried to return. The hospital. The monitor. The sound. Flat. Final. He shut it out. Not by force, but by choice. Not now. Not here. Focus. A whisper. Barely audible. But it grounded him. Anchored him. Brought him back to this moment. To her. He placed 2 fingers gently against her neck. Searching. Finding. A pulse. Faint. Irregular. But present. Still fighting. Still here. Good. His voice softened. Encouraging something she might not even be able to hear. But sometimes that didn't matter. Because what we say isn't always for them. Sometimes it's for us. Xavier glanced around quickly. Empty street. No help. No backup. Just him. And her. The rain. And the seconds slipping away. He removed his jacket without thinking, placing it over her to shield her from the cold as much as possible. Not enough. But something. It had to be something. He adjusted her again, lifting her chin slightly, ensuring her airway stayed open. Every movement controlled, every action intentional. This was where he used to live. This space between chaos and control. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt clear. The fear was still there. Of course it was. But it wasn't in charge anymore. Her breathing faltered again. A pause. Too long. Xavier leaned closer. Hey, stay with me. No response. Not even a flicker. His chest tightened. Not with panic, but with urgency. He checked again. Airway still open. Pulse still there. But slipping. Come on. His voice was firmer now. Not louder. Just stronger. He shifted slightly, positioning himself better. Closer. More stable. Rain soaked through his clothes, but he didn't notice, didn't care. This was everything. He placed his hand near her shoulder, grounding her, keeping her from rolling, from slipping further into that place he knew too well. You're not alone. A simple sentence, but it carried weight. Because once a long time ago someone had said something like that to him. And it had mattered. More than anything. The wind picked up briefly, sending a colder wave of rain across them. Xavier adjusted again, shielding her as best he could with his own body. Not perfect, but enough. It had to be enough. Her lips parted slightly. A weak, broken breath escaped. Xavier saw it, felt it, held onto it. That's it. That's it. Encouragement. Gentle. Persistent. He wasn't forcing anything. He wasn't fighting her body. He was working with it. Guiding it. Giving it just enough support to keep going. Seconds passed. Or maybe minutes. Time blurred. Like it always does. When everything matters. And then it happened. A deeper breath. Not strong, not stable, but different. A shift. small but real. Xavier froze for a split second. Not in fear, in recognition. He had seen this before. That moment, that fragile turning point, where the body decides to stay. He leaned closer, watching carefully. Waiting. Another breath. Still uneven, but stronger than before. And in that quiet, rain-soaked street, something changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. She was still here, still fighting, and now she wasn't doing it alone. Xavier exhaled slowly, a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His shoulders lowered just slightly. Not in relief, not yet, but in understanding. This wasn't over, not even close, but it had begun. And sometimes that's the hardest part. He looked down at her, really looked, not as a patient, not as a problem to solve, but as a person, someone with a life he didn't know, a story he hadn't heard, a future that almost ended in the rain. Xavier's voice softened again. "You're doing okay." He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but he said it anyway. Because in moments like this, hope doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be there. The rain began to ease slightly, not stopping, just softening, as if the world itself had decided to give them a little space. Xavier adjusted his position one more time, staying close, watching, waiting. Ready? Because he knew. This moment, this fragile, quiet beginning, was only the first step. But it was enough. It had to be. Because for the first time in years, Xavier Cole hadn't walked away. The rain softened. Not all at once. Not in a way anyone would notice. Just gradually. Like something unseen had decided that the moment no longer needed to be rushed. Xavier stayed where he was, kneeling on the cold pavement, one hand steady near the girl's shoulder, the other shielding her face from the drifting rain. He wasn't thinking about the past anymore. Not directly. It was still there, of course it was. But it no longer pulled at him. It no longer told him to stop. Because right now, there was only one thing that mattered. Her next breath. He watched closely, carefully. The way her chest moved or didn't. The way her lips parted slightly, as if her body was still deciding whether it had the strength to continue. This was the part people don't talk about. Not the dramatic moments. Not the urgent commands or rushing footsteps. But this, the waiting, the quiet, the fragile space between effort and outcome. Xavier had lived in this space before, many times, and he knew something most people didn't. Sometimes saving someone doesn't look like action. Sometimes it looks like staying. Hey. His voice was low, gentle, not trying to wake her, not trying to push her, just reminding her, "I'm right here." The words slipped into the night, carried by the soft rain. Maybe she couldn't hear him. Maybe she could. But Xavier had learned something long ago. The body listens. Even when the mind is far away. He adjusted the jacket around her again, making sure it covered her chest, keeping what little warmth he could. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was something. And sometimes something is all we have. A car passed in the distance. Its headlights briefly touched them, casting a soft glow over the scene. Two figures in the rain. One lying still. One refusing to leave. Then the light was gone. And the quiet returned. Xavier leaned closer, listening, not just with his ears, but with everything he had. Breath, pulse, the smallest shifts. He counted again. 1. Pause. 2. Too slow. Still too weak. His chest tightened slightly. Not panic. Never panic. But awareness. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how close the line really is. Stay with me. He said it again. Softer this time. Almost like a thought. And then, for a moment, nothing happened. The rain tapped gently against the pavement. A drop slid from the edge of the awning and landed near her hand. Time stretched. Quiet. Still. And then she inhaled. It wasn't strong. It wasn't steady. But it was different. Deeper. As if her body had found something it had almost lost. Xavier didn't move. Didn't speak. He had learned you don't interrupt moments like this. You witness them. He watched her chest rise again. Slowly. Carefully. And this time it didn't falter. A second breath followed. Still fragile. Still uncertain. But real. And in that small, rain-soaked corner of the world, it felt like something extraordinary. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. Xavier exhaled quietly. A breath he had been holding longer than he realized. His shoulders dropped slightly. Not in relief. Not completely. But enough. Enough to acknowledge what had just happened. She was still here. He glanced at her face again. Really looked this time. Not through the lens of diagnosis. Not as a set of symptoms. But as a person. Her features were soft. Young. There was something almost familiar about the way her brow tensed slightly, even in unconsciousness. Like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Xavier understood that look. More than he wanted to admit. You're doing okay. The words came naturally now. Not rehearsed, not clinical, just honest. He wasn't promising anything. He wasn't claiming victory. He was simply acknowledging the truth she was still fighting. The rain continued to ease. Not stopping. But gentler now. Like the world had stepped back, giving them space to breathe. For a moment, Xavier allowed himself to feel it. Not the past. Not the weight. Just this. The quiet miracle of a breath returning. The simple, powerful act of a life choosing to stay. He didn't smile. Not fully, but something in his expression softened. Something that hadn't been there in a long time. Not confidence, not pride. Something quieter. Something deeper. Recognition. Because this was why he had once chosen that path. Not for the titles. Not for the recognition. But for moments like this. Moments no one sees. Moments that don't make headlines. Moments that exist quietly. Between two people in the middle of nowhere on a rainy night. Another breath. Stronger now. Still uneven, but holding. Xavier adjusted slightly, making sure her position remained stable. His movements were slower now. More measured. The urgency had shifted. It hadn't disappeared. But it had changed. From survival to protection. He pulled his jacket a little tighter around her, making sure the cold didn't take back what her body had just reclaimed. Stay warm. A simple instruction. But layered with something more. Stay here. Stay present. Stay alive. Somewhere in the distance, a faint sound echoed. Not loud, not immediate, but coming closer. Xavier's eyes flickered briefly toward the street, then back to her. Still here, still breathing, he didn't move away, didn't step back, didn't distance himself from what he had just done. Because something had changed. Not in the world, not in the rain, but in him. For years, he had told himself that walking away was the only way to survive, that staying out of it was safer, that not trying meant not failing. But now, kneeling there in the quiet aftermath of something fragile and real, he saw it differently. Sometimes, not walking away is the beginning of healing. Xavier looked down at her again. Her breathing had steadied just enough to hold. Not strong, not safe, but enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to wait for what came next. You're not alone. He said it one more time. Not because she needed to hear it, but because he did. The rain continued to fall. Soft, steady, almost gentle now. And in that quiet, unnoticed corner of the world, no applause, no recognition, no witnesses a life had turned back from the edge. And a man who once believed he had nothing left to give had just proven himself wrong. By the time the rain thinned to a quiet mist, the world had already begun to move again. Not loudly, just enough. A car slowed at the far end of the street. Its headlights didn't rush past this time. They lingered, then dimmed, and stopped. Xavier didn't look up right away. His attention was still anchored where it needed to be on the girl. Her breathing had settled into a fragile rhythm. Not stable, not safe, but holding. He kept his hand near her shoulder, steady, reassuring, as if that small point of contact was a bridge she could cross back on. Because sometimes it is. The car door opened, softly, then closed. No rush, no panic. Just controlled movement, measured, deliberate. Footsteps followed, firm, even. Not the uncertain steps of someone afraid, but the grounded rhythm of someone who had learned long ago how to walk into difficult moments without losing themselves. Xavier heard it. Of course he did. But he didn't turn. Not yet. Yara. The voice came through the quiet air. Strong, clear, and beneath it, something that couldn't be hidden. Fear. Not loud, not desperate, but real. The kind of fear that belongs only to someone who has already imagined the worst. Xavier finally lifted his head. A woman approached quickly, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. Even before she stepped fully into view, there was something unmistakable about her presence. Not authority. Not exactly. Something deeper. Control. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. She knelt beside them almost immediately, not hesitating, not asking permission. Her eyes moved quickly first to the girl, then to Xavier, then back again. Assessing, understanding, holding everything together at once. Yara. This time softer, closer. Her hand reached out, brushing gently against the girl's cheek. Not shaking her, not forcing her awake. Just there, present. She's breathing. Xavier's voice was calm, low, grounded, not claiming anything, just stating the truth. The woman looked at him then. Really looked. For the first time. There are moments when people recognize something without knowing why. This was one of them. She didn't ask what happened, didn't demand explanations. Instead, her gaze dropped briefly to his hands, still positioned exactly where they needed to be. Steady, precise. Not the hands of someone guessing. Not the hands of someone trying. The hands of someone who knew. You kept her airway open. It wasn't a question. Xavier gave a small nod. That, and a few other things. Simple, unremarkable. As if what he had just done was no more significant than holding a door open for someone. The woman studied him for a second longer. Not suspicious, not impressed, just aware. And then she turned back to Yara. Her focus shifted instantly, completely, because whatever she had noticed in Xavier, it could wait. Yara couldn't. I'm here. She said it quietly, leaning closer. Not as an officer, not as someone used to being obeyed, but as a mother. And in that moment, everything else fell away. Xavier adjusted slightly, giving her more space. But he didn't move far. Not yet. Something told him this wasn't over. The woman reached for Yara's hand, held it gently, her thumb brushing lightly across cold skin, as if trying to remind it what warmth felt like. You're okay. A whisper, almost identical to his own earlier words. Different voice, same intention. Yara's breathing shifted again. Still fragile, but responding. Small changes. Subtle, but real. The kind of changes you only notice if you're paying close attention. And the woman was. She glanced up at Xavier once more. This time longer. Taking in more than just the moment. His posture, his stillness, the way he stayed present without needing to take control, without needing recognition. That told her more than any explanation could. You didn't call for help. The question came calmly, not accusing, just curious. Xavier shook his head slightly. There wasn't time to wait. A simple answer. Honest and complete. She considered that. Nodded once, because she understood. Some decisions aren't about protocol. They're about timing. And timing doesn't always give you options. A faint sound echoed in the distance now. Closer. Recognizable. Sirens. The woman exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not fully. But something close. They're on their way. Xavier nodded again. His gaze returned to Yara. Still there. Still breathing. Still fighting. For a few seconds, no one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty. It was shared. Then the woman shifted slightly, sitting back just enough to look at Xavier more directly. You've done this before. Again, not a question. Xavier paused. Just briefly. The kind of pause that carries history. Then something like that. It was an answer, but not a full one. and she knew it. Her eyes moved again to his hands. Still calm, still steady. No trembling now. No hesitation. Just quiet control. There was something familiar about it. Not the situation, but the precision, the restraint, the way he didn't do more than necessary, but never less. That kind of balance is learned, earned, paid for. You're not just something like that. Her voice remained even, but firmer now, not pushing, just stating. Xavier didn't respond, because there are truths you don't argue with, and others you're not ready to accept. The sirens grew louder, closer, cutting gently through the night. Yara stirred faintly. A small movement, barely noticeable, but enough. The woman leaned in again immediately. "I've got you." Her voice softened once more. Back to where it belonged. Xavier watched quietly, not intruding, not stepping forward. Just there, ready, if needed. And in that quiet space between them, something passed. Not words, not recognition. Something simpler. Respect, not for who he was, not for what he had been, but for what he had done. Without hesitation, without expectation, without needing anyone to see. The ambulance lights appeared at the end of the street, flashing softly through the mist. Xavier finally leaned back slightly. Not leaving. Not yet. But allowing the moment to begin shifting into someone else's hands. The woman followed his movement with her eyes. And for the first time, there was something different in her expression. Not just awareness, not just curiosity, but certainty. She didn't know his name, didn't know his story, didn't know where he had come from, or why he had been standing there. But she knew men like this don't just appear. And they don't just disappear either. You stayed. She said it quietly, not as praise, not as surprise, just acknowledgement. Xavier looked at her for a moment, then back at Yara. Someone had to. Simple, uncomplicated, true. The sirens reached them. Voices followed. Movement. Light. Sound. The world returning to its usual rhythm, but something had already changed. Not in the street, not in the rain, but in the quiet understanding between two people who had just witnessed the same moment from different sides. And as the paramedics rushed forward, the woman in uniform remained steady, focused, present, but now watching Xavier just a little more closely than before. The ambulance doors opened with a firm metallic sound. Not loud, but final. Like the moment had shifted from quiet survival into something more structured, more official. Paramedics moved with practiced efficiency. Quick, focused, no wasted motion. One of them knelt beside Yara, immediately checking her pulse. her breathing, her responsiveness. Another began preparing equipment. Questions were asked. Short, direct. What happened? How long was she down? Did she regain consciousness? The woman answered calmly. Not rushed, not scattered, just precise. She collapsed less than 5 minutes ago. He stabilized her airway. Breathing improved before you arrived. Her voice carried weight. Not authority in the loud sense, but clarity. The kind that comes from someone used to making decisions when things matter. One of the paramedics glanced briefly at Xavier. Just a quick look, but enough to register something. Sir, did you perform any intervention? Xavier paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the question itself felt heavier than it should. A few basic steps. His voice stayed neutral, careful, measured. The paramedic studied him for a second longer, then nodded. Whatever you did, it helped. Simple, professional, but sincere. Xavier didn't respond. He wasn't looking for validation. Not anymore. Not from strangers. Not from anyone. They worked quickly after that, adjusting Yara's position, monitoring her breathing more closely, preparing to move her onto the stretcher. The rhythm of trained hands taking over. Xavier shifted back slightly, giving them space, letting go not emotionally, but physically, because this part was no longer his. But even as he moved away, his eyes stayed on her, watching, waiting, making sure she didn't slip again. She's stabilizing, one of the paramedics said quietly, more to the team than anyone else. But Xavier heard it, and something inside him settled. Not relief, not yet, but a quiet acknowledgement. She had made it past the edge. The woman stood slowly now, not stepping away, just rising to meet the moment differently. She turned to Xavier again, and this time there was no distance in her gaze, only focus. What's your name? The question came calmly, not interrogating, not demanding, but direct. Xavier hesitated, just briefly. Names have a way of opening doors. Doors he had spent years keeping closed. Xavier, he said finally. No last name, just enough. The woman held his gaze, unblinking. Xavier. What? There was no pressure in her tone. But there was intention, a small pause. Then Cole. The name hung between them. Quiet. Simple. But something in the way she received it shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just slightly. Cole? She repeated softly, as if testing it against something in her memory. Not placing it yet, but recognizing that it belonged somewhere. You're not just someone who knows a few things, she said after a moment. Still calm, still steady. But you don't want to say more. Xavier didn't answer, because she wasn't wrong, and sometimes silence is the only honest response. Behind them, the paramedics began lifting Yara onto the stretcher. Carefully, coordinated. Her body moved with the kind of caution reserved for something fragile, but no longer fading. The woman watched closely. Every detail, every movement. But her attention kept returning to him. He recognized it immediately. She continued, not accusing, just observing. Her breathing, her condition, the urgency. A beat. That's not instinct. Xavier's jaw tightened slightly. Not in defense, but in recognition. Because this was the part he couldn't hide. Not completely. It's experience, he said quietly. She nodded once, as if confirming something she already suspected. Yes. Another pause. Then, what kind? The question lingered. Not aggressive, but precise. Like someone narrowing in on the center of a target. Xavier looked away briefly. Toward the street, toward the fading rain, toward anything that wasn't her. There are questions that don't just ask for information. They ask for history, for truth, for things you've spent years trying not to say out loud. I used to work in a hospital. The words came slowly, carefully, as if each one had to pass through something before it could be spoken. The woman didn't react immediately, didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence. She just listened. Used to, she repeated, not questioning the word, but noticing it. Xavier nodded slightly. That was a long time ago. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. And she knew that, because people who have seen enough can hear what's missing, not just what's said. You don't lose that kind of skill, she said after a moment. Quietly, firmly. It doesn't just disappear. Xavier's eyes lowered, just for a second. Because she was right. Again, no one walks away from something like that without it leaving a mark. The knowledge stays. The instinct stays. And sometimes so does the pain. I didn't lose it, he said. Almost to himself, the woman studied him more closely now. Not trying to expose him. Not trying to push. But understanding this was not a simple story. Then, why stop? The question landed gently, but it carried weight. Xavier didn't answer immediately. He could have. There were words. There were explanations. There were ways to describe what had happened, but none of them felt complete. Because how do you explain a moment that changes everything? How do you put into words the feeling of doing everything right and still losing? He exhaled slowly. The air felt heavier now, not because of the rain, but because of what lingered beneath it. I made a mistake, he said finally. Simple, direct, but incomplete. The woman didn't respond right away. She didn't say, that happens. She didn't say it wasn't your fault, because she understood something most people don't. Some mistakes aren't measured by intention. They're measured by outcome, and you couldn't forgive yourself, she said quietly. It wasn't a guess. It was recognition. Xavier looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not guarded, not distant, but seen. He didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. But he didn't need to, because some truths don't need words. Behind them, the stretcher was secured, the ambulance doors prepared to close. She's going to be okay, one of the paramedics said as they moved. The woman nodded. Once, steady. Then she turned back to Xavier. You didn't walk away tonight, she said, not as a question, not as praise, just fact. Xavier held her gaze for a moment, then glanced briefly toward the ambulance, where Yara lay still, breathing, alive. No, he said. A pause. Then, no, I didn't. The ambulance doors closed. The sirens didn't start immediately. Just a quiet hum. A moment of stillness before motion returned. And in that space, the woman in uniform stood across from a man who had tried to disappear, but now could no longer pretend he was invisible. The ambulance didn't rush away immediately. For a brief moment it stayed there, engine humming softly. Lights dimmed, as if even it understood that something fragile had just happened. Then the doors closed, and the vehicle began to move. Slowly at first, then steadily, disappearing into the night. The street grew quiet again. Not empty, just still. The rain had almost stopped now. Only a faint mist remained drifting through the air, like a memory that hadn't quite decided to leave. Xavier stood where he was, hands lowered at his sides, still, present, but something inside him was no longer the same. The woman Zoe watched the ambulance for a second longer. Her posture remained composed, controlled, but her eyes held on to that moving light just a little too long. That's my daughter, she said quietly, not as an introduction, not as an explanation, just truth. Xavier nodded once. He had already known, not from logic, not from evidence, but from the way she had said her name, from the way her voice had changed, from the way she had knelt beside her without hesitation. I figured, he replied. Zoe exhaled slowly. Not relief, not fully, but something close. She's 18. A small pause. Still thinks she has time to figure everything out. There was no judgment in her tone, only recognition. Xavier looked toward the direction the ambulance had gone. Sometimes people don't realize how close they get. Zoe turned to him, studying him again, not as sharply as before, but more personally now. You knew that. It wasn't a question. Xavier didn't answer, because the truth was already there. Between them, the silence stretched for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Then Zoe spoke again. Her name is Yara. This time it wasn't for him. Not really. It was for herself, a way of holding on to something real in the middle of everything that had just happened. Xavier nodded. Yara. He repeated softly. Names matter. They always have. They turn a moment into something more. Something human. Something you carry with you. She's been going through something. Zoe continued. Her voice steadier now, but quieter, less guarded. Xavier didn't interrupt, didn't ask, just listened. Her father passed away 2 years ago. A pause. She doesn't talk about it much. Another pause. But you can see it, if you pay attention. Xavier's eyes lowered slightly, because he understood that kind of silence. The kind that doesn't ask for help. The kind that carries weight quietly. Day after day. She tries to act like she's fine, Zoe said. And most people believe her. A faint breath. Almost a laugh. But not quite. I used to believe her too. Xavier shifted slightly. Not uncomfortable, but aware. Because sometimes he had done the same thing. Pretended. Hidden. Survived. Without being seen. She didn't collapse because of the rain. Zoe added. Or exhaustion. Xavier looked at her again, more focused now. She's been skipping meals. Zoe said quietly. Barely sleeping. Carrying things she doesn't know how to let go of. The words settled between them. Heavy, but familiar. Xavier nodded slowly. Her body gave out before she did. Zoe's eyes softened, because that was exactly it. They don't teach you how to see that, she said. Not in any training. Xavier's expression shifted slightly. A small, almost imperceptible change. No, he replied. They don't, because some things you don't learn from books, or from classrooms, or from protocols. You learn them by being there, by watching, by failing, by carrying the memory of what happens when you miss it. Zoe studied him again. More carefully this time. Not looking for answers, but recognizing something deeper. You've seen this before. Xavier didn't respond immediately. But this time, he didn't look away either. Yes, he said. The word was simple, but it held weight. Zoe nodded, not surprised. Not anymore. Then she said something quieter, something different. Did you lose someone? The question didn't come from curiosity or investigation. It came from understanding. Xavier's breath slowed. Just slightly. The street around them felt even quieter now, as if the world itself had stepped back, giving space for something real. He didn't answer right away, because some questions don't just ask for facts. They ask for something deeper, something harder. Finally, he spoke. Yes, one word, but it carried everything. Zoe didn't ask for more, didn't press, didn't try to fill the silence, because she didn't need to. She had seen enough people, enough moments, enough pain, to know when a single word was the whole story. I'm sorry, she said, Not out of obligation, not as a reflex, but because she meant it. Xavier nodded once. A quiet acknowledgement. Then something unexpected happened. Zoe looked toward the street again. Toward the direction the ambulance had gone. And for the first time, her voice softened in a way that didn't belong to an officer or a commander, but to a mother. She told me something once. Zoe said. Xavier waited. She said, a pause, as if choosing the words carefully. Mom, sometimes people don't need someone to fix them. Another pause. They just need someone who doesn't walk away. The words settled quietly into the night. Xavier's chest tightened slightly. Not with pain. Not exactly. But with something close, because he had walked away. For years. From everything. From everyone. From himself. And yet tonight, he hadn't. Zoe turned back to him. You didn't walk away from her. She said, again, not praise. Not surprise. Just truth. Xavier looked down briefly. Then back up. Number. A small pause. I didn't. Zoe held his gaze for a moment longer. Then, for the first time, she smiled. Not wide, not dramatic. Just real. Then maybe, she said softly. You didn't fail the way you think you did. The words weren't meant to fix anything. They weren't meant to erase the past. But they did something else. They created space, a small opening where something new might begin. Xavier didn't respond, not right away, because for the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. And maybe that was okay, because sometimes healing doesn't start with answers. It starts with a moment. A quiet one, where someone says something simple, something honest, and for the first time, you don't push it away. You let it stay. The rain had stopped completely now. The streetlights reflected softly off the wet pavement. The world had returned to normal, but something deep, quiet, and undeniable had changed, and neither of them pretended otherwise. The street had gone quiet. Not empty, just settled. Like everything that needed to happen had already happened. And what remained was something softer. The air felt different now. Cooler. Cleaner. The rain had washed the city just enough to make everything seem clearer than before. Streetlights reflected gently across the pavement, turning the ground into something almost still, almost calm. Xavier stood there for a moment longer. Not because he needed to, but because something inside him wasn't ready to move just yet. Zoe remained nearby, not speaking, not interrupting. She understood something most people don't. There are moments you don't rush. Moments that need space to become what they are. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had just happened. Full of everything that hadn't been said. Full of something shifting. Xavier looked down at his hands. Still steady. Still capable. Still his. For years he had tried not to see them this way. not as tools, not as something that could make a difference. Just hands, ordinary, detached, safe, because seeing them for what they truly were meant remembering everything else. The weight, the responsibility, the moments that don't end when the situation does. But tonight, that distance had disappeared, not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly. He had acted, without permission, without preparation, without hiding, and something had happened, something real. A life had stayed. Xavier exhaled slowly. You know, Zoe's voice came gently into the space. He looked up. Most people in your position, she said, would have walked away. There was no accusation in her tone, no expectation, just truth. Xavier considered that. Not defensively, not dismissively, just honestly. I almost did, Zoe nodded. Because she believed him, almost matters. She replied, a small pause. Because you didn't. Xavier looked past her for a moment, toward the direction the ambulance had gone. His thoughts followed it. Not to the hospital, not to the outcome, but to the moment before everything changed. The hesitation, the fear, the weight of what he thought he couldn't carry anymore, and the decision to move anyway. I told myself, he began slowly, that staying away was the right thing. Zoe didn't interrupt. That if I didn't step in, he continued, I wouldn't have to live with another failure. The word lingered. Failure. Zoe heard it, but she didn't correct him. Not yet. But tonight, Xavier said, it didn't feel like a choice anymore. He paused. It felt like leaving would have been worse. Zoe studied him quietly. That's the part people don't talk about, she said. He looked at her. The cost of not doing something. Xavier gave a small, almost invisible nod, because he knew that cost. He had lived with it. For a long time. Zoe took a step closer. Not to close distance, but to meet him where he was. You didn't lose who you are, she said. Xavier's expression shifted slightly. You just stopped letting it show. The words settled. Not heavy, but clear. I thought, Xavier said quietly, that if I left it behind, he hesitated. It would stop hurting. Zoe's eyes softened. And did it? A small silence. Xavier didn't need to think about the answer. Number. Just that. No explanation, no justification. Because some truths are simple. Zoe nodded once. Pain doesn't work like that, she said gently. Another pause. But purpose, she let the word sit for a moment. Sometimes does. Xavier looked at her. More focused now. Purpose gives the pain somewhere to go. The sentence was quiet, but it carried something deeper. Not a solution, not a promise, but a direction. Xavier's gaze lowered again. For years, he had been holding everything inside, trying to contain it, trying to outrun it, trying to make it smaller, but it never changed, because pain that has nowhere to go doesn't disappear. It waits. And maybe it wasn't meant to be hidden. Maybe it was meant to be used, not to fix the past, Not to erase what happened, but to change what comes next. You think I should go back? Xavier said. Zoe didn't answer right away, because this wasn't about what she thought. No, she said finally. Xavier looked up. I think, she continued, people like you don't need to go back. A small pause. They need to move forward. The difference was subtle, but important. Back is where the pain is, Zoe said. Forward is where it becomes something else. Xavier held on to that, not fully understanding it. Not yet, but feeling it. I'm not that person anymore, he said quietly. Zoe gave a small smile. No one ever is. Another pause. But that doesn't mean you stopped being someone who helps. Xavier's chest tightened slightly, because that part he had never truly let go. He had just buried it. I don't want to be. He hesitated. Or who I was. Zoe nodded. That's okay. Then she said something simpler. You don't have to be. Xavier looked at her. You just have to be someone. She paused. Who doesn't walk away. The words landed differently this time, not as a reflection, not as something someone else had said, but as a choice, his choice. The street was quiet again. No sirens, no movement, just two people standing in the aftermath of something that had mattered. Xavier looked down one last time at his hands, not with distance, not with fear, but with recognition. They hadn't changed. He had, and maybe that was enough. I don't think I'm ready, he said slowly. Zoe didn't interrupt. To go back to what I was doing before, she nodded. I didn't think you would be. A small silence. But I think, Xavier continued, I can do something. The words felt unfamiliar, but right. Not big, not dramatic, just real. Zoe's expression softened. That's all it ever is, she said. Something, and sometimes something, is everything. Xavier looked toward the horizon. The night was beginning to shift, not into day, not yet, but into something quieter. Something new, a beginning, not loud, not announced, just chosen. And for the first time in a long time, Xavier Cole didn't feel like he was running anymore. He felt like he was standing, exactly where he needed to be. Time didn't change everything. It never does. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't rewrite the past. And it certainly doesn't turn pain into something it never was. But sometimes it softens the edges, just enough for something new to grow. A few weeks passed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone would notice from the outside. The city moved on as cities do. People walked the same streets. Cars followed the same routes. Rain came and went and came again. But for Xavier, something had shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. The small storefront sat on a quiet corner a few blocks away from where everything had begun. It wasn't impressive. No bright signs, no polished glass windows, just a simple door, a modest space, and a hand-painted sign above it, walk-in care. Inside the room was warm. Not because of anything fancy, just cared for, a couple of chairs near the wall, a small desk, basic supplies. Nothing more than what was needed. Nothing less than what mattered. Xavier stood near the counter, organizing a few items slowly, carefully. His movements were familiar again. Not rushed, not tense, just steady. He hadn't gone back to a hospital, hadn't returned to the world he once knew. The bright lights, the endless corridors, the expectations that never seemed to end. This was different. Here no one asked for perfection. No one expected miracles. They just needed help, and that he could give. The door opened softly. A small bell chimed. Xavier looked up. An older man stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. His posture slightly bent. His expression unsure. "Sorry." The man said, "I wasn't sure if you were open." Xavier gave a small nod. "I am." The man hesitated near the door. "I don't have insurance." Xavier didn't pause, didn't hesitate. "That's okay." The man blinked slightly, as if he wasn't used to hearing that answer. "I just needed someone to look at this." He lifted his sleeve slightly. A minor injury. Nothing urgent, but enough to matter. Xavier stepped forward. "Have a seat." Simple, direct, kind. The man sat down slowly. Still uncertain, Xavier moved with quiet confidence. Not performing, not proving anything, just helping. And in that small room something happened. Not a miracle, not a dramatic save, just a moment. A man who needed help. And another man who chose not to walk away. Days passed. Then more. Word spread quietly. Not through advertisements, not through announcements, but through people. A mother who brought her child. A worker who couldn't afford a hospital visit. A woman who had nowhere else to go. They came one by one, and Xavier met each of them the same way, without judgment, without distance, without needing to be anything more than present. One afternoon, the door opened again. This time, he didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Hi." The voice was softer now, stronger. Xavier turned. Yara stood near the entrance. No rain this time. No collapse. Just standing, alive. "You look better," Xavier said. She smiled slightly. "I feel better." A small pause. "I've been meaning to come by." Xavier nodded. "I'm glad you did." She stepped inside, looking around, taking in the space. "It's simple," she said. Xavier gave a small smile. "It works." Yara nodded. "Yeah, it does." Another pause. Then she said something quieter. "I don't remember everything from that night." Xavier didn't respond. "But I remember." A voice. She looked at him. Someone telling me I wasn't alone. The words settled gently between them. Xavier's expression didn't change much, but something behind it did. "That sounds right," he said softly. Yara smiled again. "Thank you." Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. And sometimes that's more powerful than anything else. Later that evening, another figure appeared at the doorway. Zoe, this time not in uniform. No rank, no title, just a mother. She didn't step inside immediately, just stood there for a moment, watching, watching Yara laugh softly at something Xavier said, watching the space, the quiet, the care. Then she stepped in. "You built this," she said. Xavier looked up. "Something like that." Zoe nodded. "I thought you might." A small silence. Then she added, "You didn't go back." Xavier shook his head. "Number." Another pause. "But you didn't walk away either." Xavier looked around the room. At the chairs. At the small desk. At the people who came and went. "No," he said, "I didn't." Zoe smiled slightly. Not as an officer. Not as someone who had figured everything out. Just someone who understood. "You found your way." Xavier didn't answer, because maybe he hadn't found it. Maybe he had simply stopped running from it. The sun began to set outside. Soft light filtered through the window, warming the small room just enough to make everything feel still, peaceful, and in that quiet space, no applause, no recognition, no headlines. A man stood behind a simple counter, helping people, one at a time, not because he had to, not because he was expected to, but because he chose to. And sometimes that choice is everything, because not every hero stands in the spotlight. Some stand in small rooms, on quiet streets, in moments no one sees, and they don't save the world. They just don't walk away. And somehow that changes everything. There are moments in life that don't look important at first. No audience, no recognition, no one standing nearby to say you did the right thing. Just a quiet decision. Stay or walk away. And the truth is, most of us have walked away at some point. Not because we didn't care, but because we were tired, because we were afraid, because we weren't sure. We could carry one more thing. Xavier thought walking away would protect him. That if he stayed far enough from pain, he wouldn't have to feel it again. But life has a way of bringing us back to the very place we tried to leave. Not to punish us, but to remind us of who we really are, because sometimes the part of you that hurts the most is the part of you that still cares. And maybe healing doesn't come from forgetting what happened. Maybe it comes from choosing not to walk away the next time it matters. That night, there was no miracle, no dramatic rescue, no applause, just a man who stayed. And somehow that was enough, because the world doesn't always need perfect people. It needs present ones, people who show up, people who stay, people who try, even when they're not sure they can succeed. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes the difference. If you're watching this today, maybe there's something in your past you still think about, a moment you wish you could change, a decision you still carry quietly inside, and maybe you've been telling yourself the same thing Xavier did. That part of my life is over. I've done enough. I don't want to go back there again. But let me gently tell you something. You don't have to go back. You don't have to be who you were. You just have to be someone who still cares. Because it's never too late to do one more good thing. It's never too late to help someone, even in a small way. Sometimes it's not about changing the whole world. It's about changing one moment, one decision, one person's life. And sometimes that person is you. If this story touched you in any way, tell me, where are you watching from? Today I'd truly love to hear your story. And if you believe that kindness still matters, please consider supporting the channel so we can continue sharing more stories like this. Because in a world that moves so fast, we all need reminders like this, that even in the quietest moments, a simple choice can bring someone back to life.